Stella Watches has just hit their 3-year mark, and with that, one of their newest models is the Ellis GMT, available in two different colors. This black you see here, and a very cool ice blue dial as well. A little over 2 years ago, I reviewed the Stella Felix, a very distinct watch as well, with a denim texture dial, amazing leather straps, but Stella, they wanted to up their game, and I can safely say they are headed in the right direction with this Ellis GMT, which has a crazy dial texture, a bit of a vintage vibe, an SW330 movement, and pricing starts at $1,285. That is a high price for a micro, no denying that. So let's take a look and see what this Ellis GMT has to offer. Stella is an interesting brand, and as you can see with the Ellis, this is not exactly a traditional design and outside the traditional style of watches such as a pilot watch, a field watch, or a diver. And I guess you could say this probably leans pilot watch, but I'd put it just in the sports watch category. The case design does take some inspiration from the Braymont Supermarine, but overall, I would say this is a pretty original design, something that is hard to do, especially these days. On screen, you're going to see all the specifications, and there is a lot to talk about here. So I will start off with these are new cases. Even though they look similar to the Felix model, these are slightly different. They're made by a new manufacturer, and this is a 41.5 millimeter case, not 40. Everything also looks to be just a little bit nicer, a bit more polished, if you will, which is a good thing as these are not inexpensive watches. So, before we move forward, let's talk about that price. I've now mentioned it twice, and the reality is the amount of micros that price at about $1,000 is a small percentage. Now, they're out there, of course, such as Oak and Oscar, Manta, the Marin Instruments diver I recently reviewed, and of course others. But to many, when they think of micro brands, they think of watches less than $1,000. Now, like the Marin Instruments diver, these are marked Swiss made, and of course, this is a GMT Solita movement, so the higher price should be expected. The case, as I said, will remind one of Braymont, but this is inspired and not what I would call a ripoff. This is a four-piece case design, and the bottom piece of the case is black PVD. Then you have the mid case with a beautiful satin brush finish and those ultra downturned lugs. A beautiful stacked case design and one that stands out. The crown is large, it does screw down, and it's beautiful. It's aluminum and enamel accents, and of course you get that red star, but the crown is just too smooth in my opinion, and it lacks any real grip, and as such, it's kind of hard to use. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not completely unusable. I just wish the crown had a lot more grip to it. Moving on to the dial. Now, look, this textured dial is insane. And when I put posts of this on Instagram and Twitter, that was the one thing everybody's commenting about is, my God, look at that dial. It's definitely one of the highlights of this watch. It's just beautiful. The texture is like small little pillars, but it's done kind of in a sunburst style, so it spreads out from the center of the dial. And between the actual dial and then that domed sapphire and the way it works together, it's just one hell of a dial texture. Now, unlike most GMT watches, Stella chose to go with the GMT center dial and inner GMT hand. Now, I think it looks attractive, and with the applied indices and numerals, the center dial still stands out. But even with the red arrow GMT hand, the ring is still kind of hard to read. Actually, it's just hard to read, and the numbers are very small. Now, I think this is why most opt for a GMT bezel as opposed to a center dial ring, especially for a smaller watch. You know, if this were a 45 millimeter or larger piece, well, that ring would probably be a lot easier to read. The case back is now solid, unlike the Felix, and instead of a decorated movement, we get an etched case back with the landmarks of New York City, the Statue of Liberty, and Ellis Island. It's a great looking case back, and it's very nicely finished, as you can see. But Then we get to an area here of contention, and that is the bracelet, more specifically the lack of end links and the gap between the case and the strap themselves, strap gap as we call it. Now, this is the first bracelet for the brand, and it's a 7-link bracelet. It's a mix of polished and brushed finishes, screw-in links, and a dual deployant clasp. No half links though, and then we get to the lack of end links. Now, I spoke to Marcella from Stella Watches directly, and she straight up told me this was a design choice. Many had been asking for a bracelet option, and they looked at many different styles, and there was another Ellis model prototype, one that had a GMT bezel, and she liked the solid end links on that one, but didn't think it flowed with the design of this version, and this is the one they ended up going with. At some point, they may release the other version or a similar one to it. I don't know. Of course, that's always on the table, I guess. But what about that gap? Well, as I suspected, the case is finished all the ways around, and as such, the lug holes were placed further. If the lug holes were placed further in on the lugs, any strap or bracelet would rub against the case and it could ruin the finish. Now, I am admittedly not a fan of straight end links on a bracelet, but the bracelet is beautiful and the black leather strap is very nice as well, with pebbled grain and a great buckle that is large but not oversized. It's very comfortable on the wrist, but I have to say it, I'm not a fan of the strap gap. It's it's lessened by the case being finished the way it is, and it looks much better than I thought it would, but I still would prefer if the lug holes were placed a little further in. Of course, this is just my opinion, and I'm sure there are many who won't be bothered by this at all. On my 7.5 inch or 19.05 centimeter wrist, both the strap and bracelet are comfortable, but in this case, I just prefer it on the leather strap. Lastly, we get to the Lume, and I do have to say, I remember the Lume on the Felix being a little bit better. I don't really expect watches such as this to have, like Seiko or Lume Tech levels of Lume. This will glow in the dark, just know it's not one of the watch's best attributes. So, as you can see, this is a really gorgeous watch, and I hope I was able to convey on screen how well it is constructed and finished. It is nice to see a brand that's not afraid to do something different, especially in the micro brand watch space, where so many seem to copy the same designs over and over. I also love that while so many brands are going under 40 millimeters, Stella chose to make this one 41.5 millimeters. Now, I know some will balk at that, but sorry, not everyone likes a sub 40 millimeter watch. And for those that do, there are a lot of them out there these days. I love what the brand is doing, and pricing, while high, does seem justified, all things considered. I just wish for either solid end links or a smaller gap, but beyond that, it's another great example from Stella. Now, if you have any questions, please ask them below, and I will do my best to answer them. Commenting is free, as is liking and subscribing, so please make sure to do all three. There will be a written review on watchreport.com, and of course, the Stella website is linked below as well. This is Don Evans from Watch Report. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.